In the early 13th century, the world's great civilizations believed themselves secure. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China behind fortified cities and massive armies. The Islamic world flourished with trade, science, and scholarship. European kingdoms fought their own wars, confident in castles and armored knights. Beyond their maps, beyond their assumptions, lay the vast Mongolian steppe, an ocean of grass, unforgiving winters, scorching summers, endless horizons. From this land would rise a force that did not rely on stone walls, gold, or ancient tradition. It relied on speed. And it began with a boy named Temujin. To understand the Mongols, you must understand their environment. The steppe did not allow weakness. Tribes survived by herding animals, horses, sheep, goats. They moved constantly, following grazing patterns. Children learned to ride before they could properly walk. Archery was not a sport. It was survival. There were no permanent cities. No stable borders. Power shifted through alliance and betrayal. Loyalty was fragile. Violence was common. This was the world Temujin was born into around 1162. Betrayal and survival. Temujin's father, Yasuge, was a minor tribal leader. When Temujin was still a child, his father was poisoned by rivals. Without protection, his family was abandoned by their own clan. They were cast out, stripped of status, stripped of support, left to survive alone. They ate wild roots. They hunted small animals. They endured brutal winters with almost nothing. Hunger reshapes a person. So does betrayal. At one point, Temujin was captured by a rival tribe and enslaved. He escaped, not through strength alone, but through intelligence and patience. These early years forged something critical inside him. He would never depend on unstable loyalty again. He would build something stronger. Breaking tradition. Steppe society was built on aristocratic bloodlines. Leadership was inherited. Temujin rejected that model. As he began gathering followers, he promoted men based on ability, not birth. A shepherd could become a commander. A noble could be demoted. This created fierce loyalty. Men followed him because they had something to gain, because he rewarded skill, because he delivered victory. But he also enforced brutal discipline. Theft within his ranks could mean death. Desertion meant execution. He was building not just a tribe, but a system. The Mongolian plateau was fractured among rival clans: Tatars, Merkids, Naimans, and others. Temujin did not defeat them all at once. He used alliances carefully. He destroyed enemies strategically. He absorbed survivors into his growing force. Each victory strengthened him. Each betrayal hardened him further. By the early 1200s, his rivals were collapsing. In 1206, a grand council of tribal leaders gathered. There, Temujin was declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler. For the first time in history, the Mongol tribes were unified. But unity created momentum, and momentum demanded expansion. Engineering the perfect army. The Mongol army was not large by traditional standards, but it was revolutionary. It was divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. A decimal system that ensured order and flexibility. Every warrior was a mounted archer. Their composite bows could pierce armor at remarkable distances. Each soldier carried multiple horses, allowing rapid movement across enormous distances. They traveled light. They lived off the land. They could cover up to 100 miles in a single day, a speed unimaginable to most medieval armies. Communication was precise. Signal flags by day, torches by night, drums and horns during battle. But their greatest weapon was psychological warfare. They spread rumors ahead of their arrival. They spared cities that surrendered immediately. They annihilated those that resisted. Word traveled faster than their horses. Fear became an invisible army marching before them. First great target, northern China. The Jin dynasty of northern China underestimated the steppe warriors. They saw nomads. They did not see strategy. Mongol forces began raiding border territories, testing defenses. Then the invasions became full-scale. They adapted siege technology from captured engineers. They learned to use catapults. They cut supply lines. Cities that had stood for generations fell. It was not just brute force. It was adaptation. Learning from enemies. Improving continuously. Genghis Khan did not see himself as a destroyer alone. He saw conquest as expansion of order under his rule. And he was just getting started. The Western campaigns began. While China was still resisting, a diplomatic crisis changed the course of history. The Khwarezmian Empire, a powerful Islamic state in Central Asia, executed Mongol envoys, a grave insult. Genghis Khan responded with total war. What followed was one of the most devastating campaigns in medieval history. Mongol armies split into coordinated columns. They struck multiple cities simultaneously. They overwhelmed defensive armies. They moved with terrifying speed across deserts and mountains. Major cities like Bukhara and Samarkand fell. Resistance was crushed decisively. Entire regions were destabilized within months. The world began to understand. This was not a raid. This was transformation. When the Khwarezmian Shah executed Mongol envoys, he believed distance would protect him. He believed deserts were barriers. He believed his fortified cities would hold. He underestimated one thing: coordination. Genghis Khan did not send a single army west. He sent multiple columns. They advanced separately, striking different cities at the same time, overwhelming communication and preventing reinforcement. Cities that had stood as economic and intellectual centers of the Islamic world collapsed in sequence. Bukhara fell. Samarkand fell. Urgench fell after fierce resistance. The Mongols did not rely only on brute destruction. They recruited captured engineers. They learned siege warfare rapidly. They used catapults, siege towers, and psychological manipulation. Before attacking, they often offered surrender. If accepted, lives were spared and the city absorbed. If rejected, punishment was absolute. This was strategy, not chaos. Terror was calculated. Fear was weaponized. The invasion of Russia. After Central Asia, Mongol forces pushed further north. The fragmented principalities of Kiev and Rus were divided and politically unstable. When Mongol cavalry appeared, local princes underestimated them, just as others had. The Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223 exposed the devastating mobility of Mongol warfare. Feigned retreat, encirclement, total collapse. Years later, under Generals Subutai and Batu, full invasion followed. Cities such as Ryazan and Vladimir fell. Eventually, even Kiev, one of the most important cities of Eastern Europe, was taken. For nearly 2 centuries, Mongol dominance over Russian territories reshaped political development in the region. Tribute systems were established. Local princes ruled, but under Mongol authority. This indirect control allowed the empire to stretch vast distances without constant occupation. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Shah in China, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains debated. What is certain is this: the empire did not collapse with him. That alone reveals the strength of the system he built. Before his death, he had structured succession carefully. His sons were assigned territories. Command systems were formalized. The Mongol state was no longer dependent on one man's presence. But unity required balance. And balance required leadership, succession and continued expansion. After internal deliberation, Ogedei Khan, one of Genghis Khan's sons, became Great Khan. Under his rule, expansion intensified. Northern China was fully subdued. Mongol forces pressed deeper into Eastern Europe. Poland and Hungary faced invasion. At the Battle of Mohi in 1241, Mongol tactics once again shattered European armies. Heavy cavalry and fortified positions proved insufficient against speed, coordination, and relentless maneuver. Europe stood exposed. Yet the Mongols suddenly withdrew. Not because they were defeated, but because Ogedei Khan had died. Leadership demanded presence in Mongolia. Succession politics temporarily halted Western expansion. Europe had been spared, not by strength, but by distance and circumstance. At its height, the empire stretched from Korea to the borders of Europe, from Siberia to the Middle East. It was the largest contiguous land empire in history. Governing such vast territory required innovation. The Mongols established relay stations across trade routes. Mounted couriers could deliver messages across continents with unprecedented speed. Merchants were granted protection. Taxes were organized systematically. Religious leaders of different faiths were allowed to practice freely, a pragmatic decision to maintain stability across diverse populations. The Yasa, the Mongol legal code, enforced discipline across ranks. It demanded loyalty. It punished corruption. It maintained order. The Mongols did not attempt to erase every culture they conquered. Instead, they often ruled through existing administrators, as long as tribute was paid and authority recognized. Control through flexibility. Domination through structure. The rise of a new era in China. Eventually, Leadership passed to a grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan. Unlike his grandfather, Kublai governed from within a settled civilization. He completed the conquest of southern China. In 1271, he established the Yuan dynasty. For the first time, all of China was ruled by a foreign power. Kublai embraced aspects of Chinese governance. He built a capital at Dadu, modern-day Beijing. He supported infrastructure, trade, and maritime expansion. Under his reign, the empire reached administrative sophistication beyond its nomadic origins. But with prosperity came new challenges. Court politics, cultural tension between Mongol elites and Chinese officials, financial strain from large-scale projects and military campaigns. The empire had reached its peak, and peaks are difficult to sustain. Connection of continents. Despite violence during conquest, the unified territory created something unprecedented: a stabilized Silk Road. Goods flowed: silk, spices, metals, ideas. Scholars traveled. Merchants crossed thousands of miles under Mongol protection. Even the Venetian traveler Marco Polo journeyed to the court of Kublai Khan, documenting a world unfamiliar to Europe. Technologies moved across continents. Paper currency, gunpowder, navigation knowledge. The Mongol Empire unintentionally accelerated globalization centuries before the modern age. It connected East and West more directly than ever before. But connection does not prevent fragmentation, and unity, once strained, begins to fracture. The Mongol Empire had expanded faster than any land empire in history. But expansion and stability are not the same thing. After the death of Genghis Khan and later his successors, the question of supreme authority became more complicated. The empire was divided into major khanates: the Golden Horde in the northwest, ruling over much of Russia; the Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East; the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia; and the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan. Though they shared ancestry and origin, they did not always share loyalty. Distance made communication slower. Local priorities began to outweigh imperial unity. Each khanate adapted differently to the cultures they ruled. In Persia, Mongol rulers gradually converted to Islam. In China, they adopted Chinese administrative traditions. In Russia, they ruled indirectly through tribute and local princes. The empire was still vast, but it was no longer one. The strain of greatness. Maintaining control over such enormous territory required resources. Armies needed payment. Trade needed protection. Infrastructure required maintenance. In China, the Yuan dynasty faced mounting resistance from the native population. Natural disasters, economic pressures, and heavy taxation weakened confidence in Mongol rule. Rebellions erupted. The Red Turban movement gained momentum. By 1368, the Yuan dynasty collapsed, replaced by the Ming dynasty. The Mongol rulers retreated north, back toward the steppe from which they had once emerged. In Persia, the Ilkhanate fragmented after succession crises. In Central Asia, rival factions weakened cohesion. In Russia, the Golden Horde gradually lost dominance as emerging powers, particularly Moscow, consolidated strength. The Mongols had conquered through unity and speed. They declined through division and internal rivalry. Not destroyed, transformed. Unlike empires crushed by invasion, the Mongol Empire dissolved gradually. There was no single catastrophic battle that erased it. Instead, its pieces adapted, blended, and were absorbed into new political realities. But disappearance is not the same as insignificance. The Mongol period permanently altered Eurasia. Russia's political development was shaped by centuries of Mongol tribute systems. China's experience under foreign rule influenced future dynasties. Trade routes that had flourished under Mongol protection laid foundations for greater global exchange. Even warfare change. Mobility, coordination, intelligence gathering, psychological tactics. The Mongols demonstrated that speed and organization could overpower traditional military structures. They forced civilizations to rethink defense, to rethink strategy, to rethink power itself. At the center of this transformation was a man who began with nothing: Temujin, the outcast child, the abandoned son, the escaped captive. As Genghis Khan, he united tribes that had spent generations fighting one another. He broke aristocratic tradition. He rewarded merit. He demanded discipline. He understood that loyalty built on opportunity was stronger than loyalty built on blood. Under his leadership, scattered nomads became a coordinated war machine. Under his vision, conquest became system. His burial site remains unknown. No grand tomb marks his resting place. No monumental statue defined his legacy during his lifetime, yet his impact shaped continents. The scale of their power. At its height, the Mongol Empire controlled territory stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. It governed tens of millions of people across radically different cultures, religions, and languages. No other land empire had connected such vast continuous territory. They did not rely on massive stone capitals at first. They did not rely on ancient royal lines. They relied on mobility, adaptation, merit, and discipline. They rose from the most unlikely environment, the open grasslands of Mongolia, and forced the world's most established civilizations to confront something new. Speed is supremacy. Coordination is conquest. Fear is policy. The thunder that remains. The Mongol Empire did not endure in a single continuous state, but its consequences endure. It accelerated transcontinental trade. It reshaped political borders. It influenced the development of Russia, China, Central Asia, and the Middle East. It demonstrated how quickly global power structures could shift. From a starving boy on the steppe, to the ruler of the largest contiguous land empire in history, the rise of the Mongols remains one of the most dramatic transformations ever recorded. They were not merely raiders. They were architects of a new geopolitical reality. Their empire fractured. Their dominance faded. But their thunder still echoes across the centuries. And history has never forgotten the storm that came from the grasslands.